morning, or depending on when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and as always told, out of Voice of Radio. So today, we need to carry on our look at the complete history of the Pokemon trading card game. And we've reached the end of an era, ladies and gentlemen. You see, this week we're talking EX Power Keepers, and this is the final Ruby and Sapphire set. This is the conclusion of Gen 3 in the Pokemon trading card game. When I see you next in this series, probably a week time, but you never know, might end up being delayed if there's news, we're going to be talking Diamond and Pearl, and we're going to be talking Generation 4. This is it, ladies and gentlemen. This is it. And there are a lot of EX sets. We started with EX, Ruby and Sapphire. We finished with this. There are 16 sets in total. Now, Ruby and Sapphire came out on June the 18th, 2003 in English, January the 31st, 2003 in Japan. Power Keepers came out on February the 14th, 2007. And it kind of came out on July the 5th, 2007. Over in Japan. Now, some of you might look at that and go, well, hang on a second, Wassy, that looks the wrong way round. It shouldn't be coming out 5 months later in Japan. And the reason essentially is that this set wasn't a Japanese set. It was an English fill-in set. You see, we know that the Pokemon Company likes to have a set ready for the release of the new games. We previously saw that EX Emerald was actually a set that was invented by the Pokemon Company International outside of Japan, so that they had something ready for the release of Pokemon Emerald. Well, they've done the same kind of thing here. They weren't ready to move on to Diamond and Pearl, so we had this fill-in set of EX Power Keepers. Now, some of the information here comes from the lovely folks over at Bulbapedia, great website to use for a bit of the old research. And essentially this was released in Japan as the World Champions Pack, but it was very much a go and buy it online. It was only available through the Pokemon card game website, and it was only actually available between June the 15th and July the 1st. That's a 2-week window to buy this set online in Japan. And what was super weird about this set is that we actually had cards created outside of Japan. It was the first time since Team Rocket that we'd actually had sets created outside of Japan to be used in the Pokemon trading card game. It's very, very strange. Now remember that Emerald did have some cards that were exclusive to that set and made their way out in Japan later, but it was things like Battle Frontier, which was still designed in Japan, but they were designed in Japan for Emerald. This was a set that actually had cards designed outside of Japan, which means that we had cards translated from English to Japanese, which basically never happens. Now, there were very few relevant good cards in the set, though the ones that were good were really good. I'm talking World Championships winning good. And that's why Japan had the World Champions Pack, so that they could actually get their hand on this. Because remember, February 2007, we're talking 6 months before Worlds. Going into Worlds 2007, if Japan didn't have cards like Absol EX, we'll get there in a minute, but you've already heard me mention it in the last few videos, Absol EX was one of the very, very best cards around, and if Japan didn't have that, they'd be at a massive disadvantage. Hence why they got the little mop-up set. Now, this set was loosely based around the Elite Four. You'll see that we actually had stadiums from each of the Elite Four members. So, I mean, the best one amongst them, the only one that really saw significant play, was Phoebe Stadium. Now, Phoebe Stadium was a very, very cool one. It just allowed you to reduce the retreat cost of your Psychic Pokemon by 2 colorless energy. But we also had Drake Stadium. He was the Dragon Elite Four member. Any damage done to colorless active Pokemon is reduced by 10. Remember, he was the Dragon Trainer. But of course, at the time, Dragon was colorless, in the same way that Phoebe was the Ghost Trainer, but Ghost is Psychic. We saw that Glacier Stadium let each player's water Pokemon have no weakness. Again, she was the Ice-type Elite Four member, but there's no ice in the Pokemon TCG. They come through as water Pokemon. And then Sydney Stadium said that each player's Darkness Pokemon could not be asleep, confused, or paralysed, i.e. the special conditions that stop you attacking, rather than burn and poison, which just put extra damage on. Though Sydney was the Dark-type Elite Four member, so at least there was no need to go for a different typing there. We have Darkness in the Pokemon TCG, though we call it Darkness, not Dark. And as we'll see in a minute, the EXs in the set were basically selected from the Elite Four Pokemon. Now, there were a bunch of really good cards in the set that were reprinted with new artwork. So, for instance, the Blaziken and Delcatty and Gardevoir from EX Ruby and Sapphire, the Wobbuffet that came around in Sandstorm, the Magneton from EX Dragon, for instance. We did see a few cards being reprinted here with alternate artwork, some of which had actually rotated out a little while before, and keeping them in the format was actually a really, really good thing. And this was very deliberate. They were supposed to bring old favourites back so that they could be relevant in tournaments again. Although they did bring back the Blaziken after Blaziken EX had rotated, so sorry? Now, in terms of the Pokemon stars, the Pokemon stars here were very, very strange. You see, the stars we got here, there were 3 of them. We got Flareon, Jolteon, and Vaporeon. And these were extremely difficult to get over in Japan. Over in Japan, they came under the heading of play promotional cards, and essentially what would happen is you would have to attend their equivalent of League, and you would earn experience points, and then you could spend those experience on promo cards, and that would include the Evolution stars. But of course, the Evolution stars were very, very expensive. I mean, looking at this table from Bulbapedia, Celebi EX was 5,000 points, Mew EX was 7,000 points. But then Vaporeon was 10,000, Jolteon was 20,000, Flareon was 30,000, Espeon was 50,000, and Umbreon was 70,000 experience points. Or to put it another way, the same as 10 Mew EXs. Ouch. Now, we didn't actually get Espeon and Umbreon in this set. They were later released in Pop 5, which was thematically lovely because Pop 5 we had a little pop packs we used to have, and they were numbered. Pop 5 was one of them. And you used to essentially earn these by going to League. And then there were extremely rare Umbreon and Espeon Star that you could pull from those packs. And they are still extremely rare, extremely valuable cards because the chances of pulling them in your Pop 5 packs was extremely low. It is interesting to note that when the World Champions pack did release over in Japan, their equivalent of this, they did include the Flareon, Jolteon, and Vaporeon, which allowed the Japanese players who hadn't been able to get them through the other method to actually get a hold of and play these cards, which was very, very nice. Now, there was some cool energy in this set. You could get yourself Holo Energy in Power Keepers. They were rather similar to the ones we've previously seen in Holon Phantoms. And if we're looking at the most expensive cards, we really are looking at the Evolution stars. You're going to be looking somewhere in the region of $300 in order to pick one of those up in decent condition. Though, of course, because Jolteon's extremely playable, we'll get to that in a moment, that generally ends up being the most expensive of them. Now, there was a pre-release promo here like there always was. It was Cacturn. But there was no pre-release deck box here. We'd seen that in the previous few sets. They'd been playing around, experimenting with deck boxes. The experiment was over. They would come back in later sets. We'll get to that in a few months' time at this stage. But I'm afraid it was gone from here. So taking a look at the EXs here, like I've said, we will see a correlation here between the Elite Four and the EXs. So we see ourselves Absol EX, who of course did belong to Sydney, and Absol EX was a phenomenal card. Claydol EX, that was generally used by Steven. I know he was a champion, but he still totally counts. And I haven't really got time to cover it in this video. I've done a separate video about it. I'll link it in the description. But Claydol EX was at the center of a rather famous hoax in the Pokemon TCG, where a bunch of good players got together and started hyping Claydol EX, trying to make people believe it was actually a really good game-breaking card, when it was in fact maybe slightly above average. Bunch of people fell for it and played it at US Nationals, but there were a few people that actually did quite well with it. We also saw that we got Flygon EX, obviously belonging to Drake, who is of course the Dragon-type Elite Four trainer, actually had 2 of them in the Gen 3 games. We saw Metagross EX, obviously that is Steven's boy. Salamence EX, who came from Drake. Shiftry EX, who we did see being used by Sydney. Again, you're talking Darkness type here. Skarmory EX, that was another one that we saw from Steven, who of course was a Steel type trainer. Walrein EX, we hadn't seen any from Glacier yet, so it's only fair that we did see one here. We saw ourselves, and that's it. That's all of them. And some of you might be thinking, well, hang on a second, Wassy, what about Phoebe? Yeah. What about Phoebe? Why doesn't Phoebe get any of her Pokemon appearing as EXs? And it's not quite as mean as you might think. You see, Phoebe had 2 Bayonet, but of course we'd already got Bayonet in Legend Maker. That was a phenomenal card. We'll get back to that in a moment. And Phoebe had 2 Dusclops, but we'd already had Dusclops EX back in Emerald. They could have given us a Sableye EX, because that was Phoebe's 5th and final Pokemon, but we never did. I'm willing to go on record and say that Phoebe's been a little bit hard done by here, because the other 4 all got EXs, and Phoebe never did. Now, in terms of the theme decks here, we did get to, as we are generally accustomed to, we got Dark Blast and Mind Game. Now, Dark Blast is based around Mighty Ina, so you get a holo version of Mighty Ina, which is actually exclusive to the deck. It was a non-holo in the set normally. And you did get a non-holo version of Delcatty, which again was exclusive to the deck because Delcatty was a holo in the set proper. There was also a rare copy of Zangoose. It was, I should have mentioned, a Fire Darkness type deck. Moving over into Mind Game, this was a Psychic Fighting deck with Dusclops on the cover, and you get yourself a holo version of Dusclops, which is exclusive to the deck. It's a non-holo in the set usually. And then you get yourself a non-holo version of Gardevoir, which is a holo in the set normally, which was kind of cool. And then we saw just a rare copy of Sableye. So at least we have one of the theme decks which was very much based around Phoebe's Pokemon. She's still been done wrong. Now moving over into the best cards here, it was a little bit barren. Honestly, there were basically 3 good cards in the set that weren't reprints, and even then one of them was very much a fringe card. Now there were 2 Pokemon that did get printed in this deck that were good, and they were good. Absol EX became one of the very, very best Pokemon at the time. I mean, if we look at Worlds 2007, the Masters Division was won by Tom Roos, playing Legendary Ascent, which was very much an Absol Eevees deck based around Absol EX. And then your Eevees like your Espeon, your Jolteon, your Vaporeon. We spoke about this deck a little while back. And then the Junior World Championships was won by Jun Hasabe, playing that Flyvies deck we've talked about. But again, this did play a copy of Absol EX. Now, if you've forgotten or you haven't watched my previous videos, etc., Absol had the awesome Poker Power Cursed Eyes. When you played it from your hand onto your bench, you got to move 3 damage counters from one of your opponent's Pokemon to another one. Allowed you to take cheeky KOs. And also, if you were going to over KO a Pokemon, do more damage than you needed, you can move a bit of damage off to essentially make that damage work. You then got 2 energy, 30 damage, plus 10 to each of your opponent's bench Pokemon with any damage counters on it. and that was a very powerful attack. Now that does explain why it comboed so nicely with Jolteon EX. Remember Jolteon EX, when you evolved up into it, you put 1 damage counter on each of your opponent's Pokemon, and then of course they would be damaged, so Absol would do its thing. And there was also a really nice combo with Shiftry EX. This was another one that we saw see a bunch of play with Absol. It worked rather nicely with it. Not this Shiftry EX, I should mention. It was the one from Crystal Guardians. Because for 2 energy, you could do 30 to one of your opponent's Pokemon, or 50 if they already had damage on. So, of course, Absol would be very good at just kind of piling that damage on with Shiftry. It was very, very cool. Make no mistake about it, Absol was one of the very, very best cards around at the time. It wasn't just because of Absol Eevees, it was the kind of card that fit into a whole range of different decks, like the Flygon deck. But let's be clear, the best use was in Absol Eevees. Now, the other card which was released here that was really good was Jolteon Star. Yeah, it was a star card, they were very, very rare. But Jolteon Star made its way into a bunch of decks, like for instance Legendary Ascent. Remember, it had the Poké Power whereby when you played it from your hand onto your bench, you put 1 damage counter on each active Pokemon. It did have a nice attack for free energy that did 40 damage and gave you immunity on a coin flip the following turn, which was cool. But the popping damage down just by benching a Pokemon really was very, very cool. Especially when you need your opponent's Pokemon to be damaged, like you would with Absol. But again, Jolteon Star didn't just see play in these Absol Eevee decks. In 2008, Jason Klaczynski won his 2nd World Championships using Psychic Lock, a Gardevoir deck, and yet Jolteon Star and Jolteon EX, for what it's worth, did find their way into the deck. Well, would you look at that, ladies and gentlemen? And it really was just Absol and Jolteon, but they were both phenomenal cards. Now, some of the reprints were very, very cool here. We did see the reprint of Delcatty that originally came around in EX Ruby and Sapphire. And Delcatty had the Poké Power Energy Draw, which let you discard an energy card from your hand and then draw up to 3 cards from your deck. It was a very nice draw engine. It also was responsible for making Infernape one of the maybe the best deck around. And this was essentially brought back in this set. We'll get to Infernape next week when we talk about Diamond and Pearl, but Delcatty really was very cool. We did see a reprint of Gardevoir as well, and Gardevoir, its time had passed a little bit. The Gardevoir with which Jason Klaczynski won the World Championships in 2008 wasn't this one, but it was still that really cool Gardevoir that let you attach a Psychic Energy from your hand to one of your Pokemon and put 2 damage counters on it. And it still comboed really, really nicely with the Gardevoir from Delta Species that for 2 energy chose one of your opponent's Pokemon and did 10 damage for each damage counter on Gardevoir to that Pokemon. So there was still a very, very cool combo there. We saw that Wobbuffet got a really nice reprint. This is the one that prevented all effective attacks, including damage, done to Wobbuffet by your opponent's Pokemon EX. So that was really nice as a safeguard Pokemon. We saw that Lantern saw a little bit of a reprint. Now that had the Poké Power Energy Grounding, and essentially when any of your Pokemon was knocked out by an opponent's attack, you could choose a basic energy card from the knocked out Pokemon and move it over to Lantern. Then for free energy, you did 50 damage, or if you discarded all lightning, you did 90 instead. It was a very cool attacker. And as I mentioned earlier, we did get a reprint of that really nice Blaziken with Firestarter. Let you attach a fire energy from your discard pile to one of your bench Pokemon. But by the time this came out, EX Team Aqua versus Team Magma had already gone. It had already rotated out. I mean, Jason Kaczynski's wonderful blog is one that I used to have a look through old decks and make sure I haven't forgotten any. And he's got a lovely little list of the tournament legal sets in each particular year. And obviously, we didn't see Power Keepers legal until the 06-07 format. But the final format where EX Team Aqua versus Team Magma was legal was the 04-05 format. So we were actually 2 years removed from Blaziken EX here, which is, well, I'll be perfectly honest with you, ladies and gentlemen, It's a little bit sad. And if you haven't checked out Jason's blog, do check it out. It is awesome. Seriously, if you ever want any deck lists for any of the decks I'm talking about, go over there. He's got lots of very good deck lists. Now, in terms of trainer cards, there really was just Phoebe Stadium. So no, she didn't get her own EX, but at least her stadium was the most playable of them. And essentially it was playable because Bayonet was good. Remember, Bayonet won the World Championships in Seniors, and this reduced the retreat cost of Bayonet by 2, so we did see Phoebe Stadium rocking up in Bayonet decks. I'll be honest with you, it wasn't exactly the biggest use of any trainer card we've ever seen, but we gotta take what we can get. There were some reprints like Steven's Advice, which did keep it in the format. Steven's Advice came around quite a while before. I mean, Steven's Advice was initially printed in Hidden Legends, so this would keep it in the format for a little while longer, which was kind of cool. But that really was it in terms of trainer cards. Now, in terms of top decks, I mean, the one deck that really came around from this set was Absol Eevees. Absol was really nice as a tech, but make no mistake about it, Absol Eevees was a phenomenal deck, and it won the Masters Division of the World Championships in 2007. You've got your Absol as previously mentioned. It plays Mew EX to copy the attacks of all of your Pokemon. It plays Rayquaza EX Delta. If you're behind on prizes, you ignore the colourless cost of its attacks. So 1 energy, 30 damage to a Pokemon, 50 if they've got a Poke Power or Poke Body, and 2 energy, 70, a very nice efficient attack. And then in terms of the EVs, you would play the aforementioned Jolteon that drops damage when you evolve into it. You would play the Espeon that when you evolved into it, you could devolve one of your opponent's Pokemon, which was kind of cool. And a Vaporeon that when you evolved into it, made your opponent shuffle their hand into their deck and draw a new hand of 4 cards. Really, really useful here for a little bit of disruption. Now, the other deck that came around here is one that we've kind of mentioned a little bit, but avoided talking about properly, and that is 4 Corners. Now, this is a deck archetype which has come around multiple times in multiple different formats. I was playing a deck like this in the black and white era, for instance. But what the general theory of the deck is that you play a bunch of different Pokemon to hit a bunch of different weaknesses. So you've got the Lantern from this set that we mentioned a moment ago. The Grumpig from Crystal Guardians that does 10 damage for each Pokemon in play, yours and your opponent's. And the Grumpig that came around in EX Deoxys that does 50 damage but 80 to an EX. You would play the Macago from Unseen Forces, which is both fighting and fire type, that for free energy did 40 damage, but against an EX it did 70 damage, which is quite nice. You would play the Breloom from EX Deoxys, which did 20 damage and poison for 1 energy, or 70 damage for free energy, bearing in mind you're a fighting Pokemon, so you're hitting a pretty good weakness. You can also play the Breloom from EX Ruby and Sapphire, which is a nice grass-type attacker, but bearing in mind at this stage, although the others I've mentioned were legal, the Breloom had already rotated. It was a cool little deck, and different versions of it would pop out pretty much throughout the EX Ruby and Sapphire era, and we hadn't mentioned it yet, so it seemed like the kind of thing we should mention here. This was a very, very strange set. Very cool set, being based around the Elite Four, and there is something awesome about the final set from a particular generation focusing on the Elite Four. That seems really appropriate. And it was very, very nice in terms of reprinting old cards, and it's very interesting. There's more stories from this set than we have from most sets. But in terms of playable viability, there were 2 Pokemon and 1 Borderline Stadium, and then a bunch of reprints. But then again, given that those 2 Pokemon ended up winning Worlds, maybe we can still say it was a good set. Either way, that is 16 episodes in a row talking about Ruby and Sapphire. Next week, ladies and gentlemen, we're talking Diamond and Pearl, and that was about the time that I started getting properly back into playing the game properly. So that's going to be fun. For now, ladies and gentlemen, I want your memories about EX, Power Keepers, about Ruby and Sapphire, about this whole block generally. Before we move on to Diamond and Pearl, let's have a discussion about Ruby and Sapphire and Power Keepers specifically. Go nuts! Be nice, and do spam that like button. And then make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at TheWassy, and Twitch for some live action at twitch.tv/PTCGRadio. If you want to support the channel, get some bonus podcasts and all that good stuff, head on over to patreon.com/PTCGRadio, where you can do exactly that. But by far the most important thing, as always, look after yourselves till next time, would ya? Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.